Special thanks to Tokyo Treat and Sakura Co for sponsoring today's video. Not too long ago now, I posted a poll over on the community tab asking you who you thought would win in a fight between Pre-Hōgyoku Captain Aizen and Pre-Almighty Yhwach. And honestly, I ended up loving the idea of this fight so much that it seemed a perfect way to resurrect my Bleach vs. Battle series, which is something I've been wanting to do for a while now. Look, while this isn't quite in time for Halloween, what's more terrifying than Bleach's two biggest villains battling to the death, unleashing absolutely everything they've got, and yet being limited by the circumstances of their current situations? Like I said, it's been quite a while since our last Bleach vs. Battle, where we took a look at a duel between two of the top, seemingly immortal Sternritter, Sternritter X Lil Barrow and Sternritter M Gerard Valkyrie. And before that, we looked at the 4th Espada Ulquiorra versus Sternritter F Asnod, while the very first battle was between two titans of the Bleach universe, the head captain Shigekuni Yamamoto and the leader of the Zero Division, Ichibei Hyosabe. Needless to say, this series has always been a ton of fun to make, and one of my favourite parts of it is getting you guys, the community, involved. So before we get started, make sure to let me know down in the comments which fight you'd like to see next, and I'll shout out the chosen winner in the next Versus Battle video, which I promise won't take as long to see the light of day as this one did. Anyway, it's time to tackle this thing. I imagine this is going to be a fairly long video, so settle in, grab a drink, and let's get started. Bleach's two main villains, the former captain of the 5th Division Sosuke Aizen versus the Emperor of the Vandenreich Yhwach. This is going to be good. Both characters are, of course, absolutely terrifying, but for totally different reasons. Aizen is a Machiavellian schemer whose immense intelligence is matched only by his unparalleled strength, and of course his Zanpakuto, Kyokusuigetsu, is maybe one of the most broken in the series. Meanwhile, Yhwach is an all-conquering warlord, perhaps the closest thing to an actual deity in Bleach, aside from his father, the Soul King himself. Even at this early stage of his character, though, Yhwach is impossibly powerful and the absolute apex of what a Quincy can be, possessing the unique ability to freely give and take power. In fact, both of these characters represent the very pinnacle of their respective races in many ways, and that might play a key role in determining a winner today. So, welcome back at long last to Bleach vs. Battles, and let's dive in. Before we get started, if you happened to enjoy today's video, consider hitting subscribe down below to help show your support for the channel and to let me know that you want more videos just like this one as well. And also consider checking out my other channel, Mr. Tomo Talks Games, where I'm really hoping we can reach 15,000 subs by the end of the year. We're about 600 subs away, so that's a tiny portion of you. If you're interested, if you want to help support me and the channel's growth, consider going over there. If you like the content, consider hitting subscribe. I really would appreciate it. And before we dive into the battle properly, first a word from today's sponsor. Well, it's freezing cold here now, and autumn has fully set in, but thankfully the newest boxes from Tokyo Treat and Sakura Co are on hand to help brighten the mood, so let's dive in and see what November has in store. Tokyo Treat is an exclusive monthly snack box designed to help you experience a delicious piece of Japanese culture from the comfort and, most importantly, warmth of your own home. In fact, this month Tokyo Treat's theme is Fuji Fall Snackscape, and it blends the coziness of the season with Japan's natural autumnal splendour. The box features hand-picked snacks such as a Mount Fuji Choco Crunch, melon high chews, sweet potato puku puku tai, and many more, specially chosen to help you embrace the seasonal feel. Alright, we're going to kick things off with the melon high chews. I've never seen these before. I like chewy sweets, gummy sweets. I like melon. This is sure to be a winner. It says premium on the bag, which is also, generally speaking, a pretty good sign. This is a substantial sweet, a very tasty sweet. That melon flavour really comes through. I know this is a bit of a cliche, but these are surprisingly refreshing. And next up, in honour of my snacking buddy Jade, who couldn't be here today, we're going to go for this strawberry white chocolate crunky, which would be very much up her alley. There's always something weirdly satisfying about very neat chocolate wrapped up in foil like this. We're going to try and break it as well. That's a good snap. This is very sweet. Look how dainty those individual chocolate blocks are. Very tasty, extremely light. and I fear very easy to get through. Meanwhile, Sakurako's theme this month whisks you away on a journey to bask in the wonders of Nagano, deep within the Japanese Alps, the perfect place to delight in the artisanal snacks included in this month's box, such as an apple pie Danish, chestnut pie, mitarashi mochi, and more, all of which go great with this month's melon hojicha tea. Plus, November's box comes complete with a Saga Shippo plate to add to your collection. The booklet is reliably informing me that there's quite a lot of apple flavour this month in the Sakurako box, which is great. I love apple flavours. We're going to start things off. We're going to kick off this taste testing session with the apple manju. And before we get started, would you know it, they explain it all in the booklet about Nagano's signature apples. Breaking into the manju is tried and tested here on this channel, so it's probably going to go down well. Yep, as expected, not an awful lot to say, this is a treat. Now, normally you get some form of jelly in these boxes each month, and I rarely try them on camera because I'm never quite sure how it's going to turn out. They are a Shine Muscat and Kyoho Grape Jelly. That's very satisfying, the way it's just perfectly aligned with the top like that. Not an imperfection in sight. Also, one last thing, despite this being a jelly, according to the booklet, it is vegetarian friendly, which is always cool to know. That was very delicious, and not particularly difficult to maneuver either. We've brought them up numerous times already, but each box also comes with a cultural booklet that features snack descriptions, allergen information, and of course some insights into the cultural theming of the month's boxes. Alright, but that's it for November's boxes. As always, I want to say a very big thank you to Tokyo Treat and Sakurako for supporting the channel each month. After the craziness of Halloween, there's nothing like the warming coziness of autumn to settle into as the year begins to wind down, so make sure to pick up November's boxes either for yourself or someone you love by visiting the link in either the description or the pinned comment below, and use my code for an exclusive offer of $5 off of your first order. Thanks everyone, and as always, enjoy. While there are a variety of ways we could have approached this battle, I think looking at each character in their respective weakest versions makes for a very interesting showdown. Obviously neither Aizen nor Yhwach are weak, and we've technically seen weaker variants of them as well, be that Vice Captain Aizen or a younger Yhwach, but neither of those characters were really explored enough to warrant being able to discuss on this kind of level. Plus, I think this is a much more balanced battle too. Things haven't quite flown off the rails for either of these characters just yet. Yhwach doesn't have access to the Almighty, which in itself is a weirdly nebulous power that we'll no doubt get into all the same. While Aizen, of course, despite his incredible strength, isn't yet immortal and can't rely on the Hōgyoku. But based on the way he acted during Deicide, that may in fact be a bonus. I guess what I'm getting at here is this feels like a much more raw, intense duel, where neither character truly has a failsafe to fall back on. And to be honest, I'm perfectly okay with that. While I like the way Aizen uses the Hōgyoku, I enjoy his transformations and what they do for the character, for his character arc. I've gone on record before saying that I'm not a massive fan of the Almighty, it's just too busted. Aside from using a special bespoke arrow to shut it down, and even that barely makes sense, there's literally nothing anyone can do. Which I guess is the point, but even though Kyokusui is revealed to be able to trick the Almighty, it ultimately doesn't matter. Yhwach can rewrite absolutely anything Aizen does to him. He rewrites his own death in the aftermath of Aizen's reveal, and speculates that Kyokusui was disengaged afterwards either due to Aizen running out of spirit energy or as a result of his own arrogance. But it didn't really matter either way, and wouldn't have mattered. And by the way, that was when Aizen had Ichigo to fall back on. Here he's on his own no matter what. Despite lacking the Almighty, Yhwach is still going to be putting up one hell of a fight. Bear in mind, this isn't just the same Yhwach that Royd was mimicking, but also the very same Yhwach who fought Ichibei. He has a million different abilities up his sleeve, even without the Almighty granting him the ability to see and change the future. At the same time, I think it's going to be all too easy to potentially underestimate Aizen going into this. Yes, as Captain Aizen, he's ultimately just a Shinigami at this point, but this is just a Shinigami who is on a completely different level to just about every other member of the Gotei 13, sans Yamamoto. And if that's the kind of caliber that we're talking about, well, this might be more even about than first expected. And so when it comes to both of these major villains, we have a fairly good understanding of what they're able to bring to this battle, so next let's take a look at the combatants themselves. Even when he was just a captain, Sosuke Aizen was one of the most powerful characters in the entire series. In fact, it was that almost unparalleled power that isolated him from his peers and colleagues, and was the catalyst for the dark path he ended up walking down. During the climactic showdown of the Soul Society arc, when Aizen's true nature is revealed, he effortlessly cuts down multiple captain-level opponents with ease, taking out characters like Hitsugaya and Renji with a single swing of his sword, while infamously blocking Ichigo's bankai with nothing but a finger. Although Ichigo was tired and weakened from his battle with Byakuya, nonetheless, this was the very same Ichigo who just went head-to-head with Byakuya and came out on top after a grueling, hard-fought duel, and Aizen shut him down without so much as blinking. There's no doubt that Aizen's closest contemporary is none other than the head captain himself, Yamamoto, as both of them are clearly designed to represent the apex of the Shinigami race. Yes, we never learn what Aizen's bankai is, or if he even has one, but as I've constantly maintained, I don't see how or even why Aizen would consider himself having hit the limit of what a Shinigami can be without one. It doesn't even make sense. Kubo even revealed in a relatively recent Club Outside Q&A that Aizen at the very least believes he would have defeated Unohana back here in the Soul Society arc too, though unlike his dealings with the likes of Hitsugaya, fighting Unohana would have exhausted him so considerably that it likely wouldn't have been worth the trouble. With Unohana almost certainly being the second strongest captain underneath Yamamoto at this point in the timeline, that places Aizen firmly among them, as one of the top 3 captains of that age, as one of the very best of the best, unstoppable, save by Yamamoto himself. Honestly, when it comes to Aizen, he's actually fairly easy and straightforward to discuss. He's mastered the 4 Shinigami combat arts, or at the very least has mastered them to such a degree as to be untouchable by almost everyone else. This simply means he's one of the physically strongest characters among the Gotei 13, and we see plenty of evidence of that. Honestly, it's easy to forget, in fact, just how absurdly strong Aizen was. Don't forget, this is the same Aizen who does the bulk of the fighting in the Fate Karakura Town arc too. Although he is fused with the Hōgyoku at that point, the Hōgyoku itself doesn't actually begin to operate until after Ichigo lands a hefty slash on Aizen directly, at which point the Hōgyoku kicks into gear, and it doesn't even begin to transform his soul until his fight with Isshin. What I'm getting at is that when Aizen somehow cuts Komamura's bankai in half with a single swing of his sword, that's all Aizen. That's the same Aizen who will be fighting Yhwach in this contest. So yeah, his physical strength is off the charts. Again, likely only exceeded by Yamamoto during the Soul Society arc, and maybe someone like Kenpachi by the time of the end of the 1000-Year Blood War arc. Again, being a captain is pretty much meaningless in the face of Aizen's power, and his strength is so great that the entire scale of what captain level really means doesn't seem to have any bearing. During the Fate Karakura Town arc, Aizen cuts down captains one after the other without even breaking a sweat. He defeats Love, Rose, and Lisa with a single strike each, putting enough power behind such a swing as to be able to defeat them effortlessly. In fact, it's more of a big deal when Aizen can't take a character down in one hit. He's actively offended by the fact that Harabel required 2 strikes to fall, and Komamura also tanked Aizen's first shot as well. But Aizen then follows this up by taking out Hitsugaya, Soifon, Kyoraku, and Shinji in a single hit each as well. Though I've said it before that I think Kyoraku and Shinji were only taken down in such a manner because Kubo wanted to hurry things up. I don't really buy them going down so easily, but I mean, they did. By the way, this just goes to show how durable Gin really was. It took, 3, 4 serious injuries from a transcended Aizen for him to finally die, and people used to complain about that. Along the same lines, Aizen should be one of the fastest characters in the series too, and again, I think we see that. For example, when he takes out Hitsugaya, it's not just a matter of strength, the Icy Captain doesn't even see him coming. It's a little harder to place Aizen in regards to his raw speed, when there are several captain-level fighters who specifically specialise in it. The likes of Soifon, Byakuya, and Yoruichi, for example, but there's no doubt he is way above even the average speed of a captain. And then, when it comes to Kido, again, Aizen is pulling off spells that most captains simply can't do, or don't even have the inclination to try. While it's clear that even Aizen is still a little rough around the edges here, unable to conjure a fully powered Hado 90 when not using a chant, I mean, that's a pretty high bar for your average captain alone, and even that was still enough to bring Komamura down in a single move. And let's not act like that isn't massively impressive in its own right. In fact, I've always liked Aizen attempting his Hado 90 here. It feels experimental. And you get the sense that he's trying to push his own boundaries and limits to see what he's capable of. Even Gin is surprised to see him use it, and the fact that he even manifests anything capable of injuring his enemy, especially one who is as hardy as Komamura, is a feat. Ultimately then, when it comes to the Shinigami combat arts, Aizen is at the very least one of the greatest in all four of them. I'd still argue he is trailing behind Yamamoto, who was pulling off Hado 96 without an incantation and dismantling Espada-level enemies with his bare hands, but there is no one else among the Gotei 13 who is both as well-rounded as Aizen and as monstrously effective. Honestly, Aizen strolling around the battlefield, taking down the entirety of the Gotei 13's captain-level force like it was just another Tuesday, is still absurd to this very day. It's not like it was even a remotely balanced skirmish. Aizen doesn't even take a single hit until Yamamoto gets involved. Hell, Gin spends an entire chapter espousing why the Gotei 13 doesn't stand a chance against such a godly foe. And of course, the ultimate reason Aizen trumps the Gotei 13 so resoundingly in this fight doesn't even have anything to do with his mastery of the combat arts. Instead, it's thanks to his Zanpakuto, Kyokusuigetsu, which really is his ace in the hole. Kyokusuigetsu Shikai, and its singular ability of Kanzen Saimin, or complete hypnosis, is simply put, one of the most all-encompassing and broken powers in all of Bleach. Aizen's Zanpakuto has the ability to manipulate all 5 of his victims' senses completely, enabling him to craft pitch-perfect illusions that, for all intents and purposes, can't be uncovered. As we see in the manga, Aizen fakes his death with his illusory powers to create a corpse of himself, which even under the scrutiny of Unohana and the 4th Division, doesn't arouse any real suspicion. Aizen can use his illusions without any prior warning, conjuring them to fool characters like Harabel, Komamura, Baragon, and yes, even the entirety of the Gotei 13's fighting force. The biggest issue then when fighting Aizen isn't in his insurmountable strength, it's the cold, hard reality of not knowing what's real and what isn't. For Kyokusuigetsu's power to work, Aizen's victim only needs to see him release his Shikai once. After that, they are trapped in his spell forever, and he's free to place them under an illusion whenever he wants. Kyokusuigetsu's complete hypnosis is so all-encompassing that it even works on Yhwach the Almighty. Even though he can see every possible future, ultimately he is still using his eyes to see them, and so Aizen is free to manipulate everything within his gaze. As seen when Aizen battles the Gotei 13, the truth is that they simply have no idea whether or not Aizen has placed them under his spell until it's too late, and characters like Hitsugaya are essentially just banking on Aizen's pride being the reason he isn't using his Zanpakuto, which proves to be their downfall in the end. Now, when it comes to Aizen's battle against Yhwach, well, that's going to be interesting. In fact, Kyokusuigetsu may prove to be absolutely pivotal one way or the other. And that's essentially everything this version of Aizen is capable of. To round things out, there are a couple of other areas in which he's almost totally unparalleled too, whether that's his intelligence, which is apparently second only to Kisuke Urahara's, allowing him to plot and scheme the best ways to bring down his enemies, and of course famously his Reiatsu, his utterly vast well of spirit energy, for which Yhwach actually placed him on the list of special war powers. Now Aizen's spirit energy increases tremendously as a result of his becoming transcendent to the point where he can disintegrate things in his vicinity, which is where we see him by the time of the 1,000-Year Blood War arc. But when it comes to Captain Aizen, well, he doesn't quite have that level of Ryoryoku just yet, but it's still absurdly high. At least double that of an average captain's, if not greater, enabling him to awaken the Hōgyoku early. Aizen's Reiatsu is so great that he's capable of bringing Grimmjow to his knees with but a glance and a short spike in power, and could negate Soifon's ability of Nigeki Ketsatsu with just his crushing spirit energy. So, look, again, that's about everything Aizen can do and has under his belt. It's safe to say that as far as the Gotei 13 goes, even Captain Aizen, even an Aizen who hasn't yet fused with the Hōgyoku, is an absolute beast of the tallest order. In some ways, this version of Aizen may in fact be more dangerous, as he hasn't yet become reckless, and in fact is more than willing to utilise both his intelligence and his Zanpakuto in combat. But, well, his opponent in this battle is fairly formidable too. On the surface, Yhwach definitely has a lot more going for him than Aizen, in some sense anyway. Aizen is very impressive when it comes to the fundamentals, and while I'm not saying Yhwach isn't as well, as he clearly is, there's a lot more weirdness involved when it comes to the Quincy King, as you might expect. Yhwach is considerably more hands-on than Aizen, especially this much earlier version of Yhwach. Once he absorbs the Soul King in the final third of the arc, he becomes a totally different fighter, which I always thought was a bit of a shame. This version of Yhwach, though, who can't just rely on the Almighty, is scrappier, tougher, and not afraid to get his hands dirty, and utilises all manner of Quincy techniques, many of which are exclusive to him. But let's begin by dialing things down a bit. Even before the Almighty, Yhwach is absolutely positioned within the story as a new barometer of power. He's the apex of what a pure Quincy can be, and even then he's not really a pure Quincy per se. I mean, he is, but he's also the son of the Soul King, and that means he's the closest thing to God that we really know in Bleach outside of Adnias himself. Aizen may want to become God, but Yhwach is already halfway there, right out of the gate. And he's introduced in a pretty spectacular fashion too. The Quincy are, in some ways, the most broken race in Bleach because they hold dominion over Reishi itself, the very matter of the world, and Yhwach demonstrates that in some pretty incredible ways. His sheer power allowed him to completely overcome Haribel and topple Waco Mundo. Poor Haribel getting taken out by both of the main villains, by the way. And he makes a habit of just erasing characters from existence, like Ludas and Ebern, with a flick of his wrist. While we mostly see Yhwach's power through Royd's lens in the first invasion, it still gives us a great idea of where this character is really at. Despite Royd only operating at 70 to 80% of Yhwach's full power in this state, he completely tramples Kenpachi, even with the captain's eye patch removed. Royd beats Kenpachi senseless, putting the captain into a coma without seemingly taking a scratch of damage himself. And again, for some perspective, consider this version of Kenpachi has defeated Espada and multiple Sternritter. During his battle against Yamamoto, Royd utilises Yhwach's Blut Vein, or a certain percentage of it anyway, to keep himself from being incinerated by the mere presence of Zanka no Tachi, and is capable of conjuring Quincy spells, such as Zankt Zwinger, that offer the greatest defense possible, threatening to destroy those who enter its space with the light of God. Of course, Royd is absolutely no match for Yamamoto's bankai, which gives us some idea of where Yhwach himself is operating. Even with the additional 20% power increase he would gain by, well, being himself, that doesn't seem to me like a significant enough jump to overcome the vast gulf created by Zanka no Tachi's sheer destructive output, though of course I'm only speculating. And it should be noted too that Yhwach himself is strong enough to steal and contain Yamamoto's bankai, which at least implies some level of balance. It implies he may very well be strong enough to use it, just as the other Sternritter could rematch their respective captains in terms of power. Though of course Yamamoto himself highlights how inferior the stolen version of the bankai seemed to be. When the real Yhwach appears before Yamamoto, he cuts the head captain in half with a single swing of his reishi broadsword. Considering Yamamoto was only tired out and not exactly weakened in any way, this feels like a pretty enormous deal to me. Maybe having his bankai stolen stripped him of some of his overall power, but even so, it's a stunningly brutal and effective strike on perhaps the single strongest Shinigami to ever live. As we see, Yhwach is capable of incredible destruction with a mere point of his finger, firing explosive arrows that leave colossal craters in the ground. Later, Yhwach utterly overpowers and outmatches Ichigo, bringing him down in just a few short moves, and is practically unharmed, save for a singed arm when taking a point-blank Getsuga Tensho to the face. You can see already that Yhwach is a slightly more complex case than Aizen, who, to be honest, is surprisingly straightforward by comparison. Yhwach isn't really seen cutting people down in the same way Aizen does, so we have to look at other metrics. Speaking of straightforward, well, the version of Yhwach that we see in the first invasion is the most straightforward iteration of the character. Once the second invasion rolls around, and Yhwach takes on an even more active role in the war, and of course the assault on the royal palace, we get to see what the Quincy King is truly capable of, and it's pretty crazy. It's here that he moves beyond just being an extremely powerful Quincy warrior, and starts to use powers and abilities that no other Quincy has access to. He goes from conjuring enormous arrows to launch at his enemies, to wielding slightly weirder, more abstract powers. Powers that an opponent is less likely to simply be able to overcome through sheer strength alone. Perhaps the key component of Yhwach's arsenal, then, is his unique ability to freely give and take power. And remember, power itself comes with a completely new definition when dealing with Yhwach, and I don't mean that in a superlative sense, which is ironic, as that's pretty much exactly what Aizen says to Komamura to insult him. But no, power is a new metric Kubo introduces when writing Yhwach, as this is a man who doesn't often deal in simple spirit energy. As seen in his duel with Ichibei, Yhwach is able to freely and seemingly without limit simply restore his lost power, which here quite literally refers to his overall strength. It's almost like a life force that comes directly from the soul, and it's exactly what the Quincy King steals from his subjects when he uses the Auswählen on them. And assuming there are, well, any Quincy operating anywhere in the world when this fight with Aizen goes down, Yhwach always has Auswählen to fall back on as the nuclear option, so to speak. Again, we are working with a truly godly character here, meaning normality is tossed out the window. This is a character who can freely return any lost power to him, and hell, even steal some more should he feel the need to. Of course, it goes beyond that as well. Thanks to his Sanct Altar ability, Yhwach can take power from his enemies too. Not only do we see him attempt to rob Ichibei of his power, but this is how the Sternritter are capable of stealing bankai in the first place. So, like I said earlier, things just aren't that simple when it comes to Yhwach, despite him being at the top of the hierarchy. Yes, he's monstrously strong, physically overwhelming, incredibly fast, and of course a master of Quincy magic and the like, but he also doesn't play by the rules. In fact, as a near-divine character, he pretty much makes the rules, and bends the world of Bleach to his will. He steals power and energy from enemies and allies alike, even telling Ichibei that everything in the world exists for his taking, and as the strongest Quincy in existence, has total dominion over Reishi. Sure, not yet to the same absurd degree that he does once he absorbs the Soul King, but still it's considerable and likely incomparable. Honestly, I do think this will be a tough battle, and I'm intrigued to see who we think ends up coming out on top. So, how exactly would this fight come about? If we go back to our recent Bleach What If video, and explore a timeline where Aizen, for whatever reason, didn't defect from the Gotei 13, then we can imagine him stepping in to challenge Yhwach during the first Quincy invasion. That way, neither of them have access to their most powerful abilities yet, or at least their divine abilities anyway. With Yhwach leading a devastating conquest of the Serete, Aizen arrives to confront him, the captain drawing his Zanpakuto amidst the fire and ruin of the ongoing war, Shinigami corpses strewn across the battlefield. Bear in mind as well before we begin that this version of Yhwach hasn't yet seen Aizen's Shikai, so that introduces some interesting questions. In fact, let's begin there, because that presents an interesting conundrum. In many ways, Aizen's Kyokusuigetsu may in fact prove to be the most consequential factor in this fight, and perhaps even the deciding one. I've always wondered how easy it is for Aizen to capture someone in his Shikai spell. As we see when he meets Baragon, he quite literally just says the words Kyokusuigetsu to release his sword, and then shows Baragon the blade. That's enough to completely place the Espada under his spell forevermore, as we see moments later when it's revealed that Baragon was put under an illusion from that point on. And personally, as I'm of the belief that Aizen does in fact have a bankai, that means he could activate his Shikai without actually saying its name. So in this instance, that maybe explains why he didn't seem to have to call the release command. He's really only saying Kyokusuigetsu's name for dramatic effect, and perhaps to help the reader know exactly what's secretly going on, though it's fairly clear anyway, especially when Aizen just holds his sword up like that for an entire panel. So, not only is Kyokusuigetsu immensely powerful and all-encompassing, but it is absurdly easy to activate as well. And if Aizen does have a bankai, who's to know when he even places them under his spell in the first place? Anyway, getting back to the main topic at hand, there are a couple of other things to consider. Does Yhwach already know about Aizen's Kyokusuigetsu? And when we say that the Vandenreich were watching the Gotei 13 from the shadows for 1,000 years, how literal is that? Literal enough that they could have also been placed under Aizen's spell when he demonstrated Kyokusuigetsu, say, for the vice-captains, for example? Does Yhwach know, therefore, the true power of Kyokusuigetsu, and did he include it in the Daten? Or has he been under its spell all this time, and written down its ability in the Daten as the power to use diffused reflections of water and fog to confuse his enemies into killing each other? It's a tricky one, and ultimately comes down to which version of Aizen we are using today. The real Aizen, who tried to deceive the Gotei 13, and for whatever reason simply hasn't enacted his plan yet by the time of the first invasion, or a wholly good Aizen, who would have no reason to hide his Zanpakuto's true power. Would an Aizen who is wholly good even have a Zanpakuto, whose nature is illusion and deception? We're at risk of going down a serious rabbit hole here, so I'm pulling back and making the executive decision to say simply that no, Yhwach isn't yet under the influence of Kyokusuigetsu, and yes, he knows what its power is. Another thing that's interesting to consider is if Aizen hasn't made any moves yet against the Serete, or really showcased his power in any way, would there really be anything special about him in Yhwach's eyes? Or would he appear before the Quincy King and simply be considered another captain? Without the Hōgyoku's influence, does Aizen even have enough Reiatsu to be considered a special war power? It might be that Yhwach takes him lightly initially, though everything we know about Yhwach, at least prior to him absorbing the Soul King, informs us that that isn't how he operates. In fact, more than anything, Yhwach might welcome the challenge with open arms, in a similar way to how Royd was eager to take on Kenpachi only to be disappointed by the captain's weakness. But it's also crucial not to underestimate Aizen. He almost certainly already knows who Yhwach is, as seen in the 1,000-Year Blood War arc, when the two come face to face in Muken. This is the same man who, when captain, knew of the existence of the Oken, which is supposed to be a heavily guarded secret. So Aizen is likely to approach the fight in his usual way. Careful, calm, but smug. Unassuming maybe, but ready to turn that perception on a dime. He's possibly even fascinated to see Yhwach in person, especially if he's aware of the Quincy King's familial connection to Adnias. As for how they'd approach the fight, well, that's interesting too. Yhwach, prior to the activation of the Almighty, is very much a hands-on fighter, which is something that I've always loved about him. Sure, he utilises a variety of Quincy's spells and abilities, but As we see in both Roid's battles and Yhwach's clashes with Ichigo and Ichibei, he's not afraid to get his hands dirty, as I said. Aizen has always been a little different, preferring to scheme and manipulate the situation and only flexing his power when truly necessary. Ultimately, Aizen is going to be much more interested in Yhwach, while the Quincy King's sights remain firmly set on the head captain for now, but that's about to change. So, let's say Aizen arrives as the real Yhwach defeats Kenpachi in the same way we see Roid achieve in the manga. Yhwach, dropping Kenpachi to the floor, muses at the appearance of another captain in his place, wondering what it'll take and how many need to fall to get Yamamoto to step forward. However, his demeanour changes when Aizen reveals that he knows who Yhwach is, to which Yhwach sardonically compliments the captain on being well read on Quincy lore. However, Aizen notes that it's not Yhwach being a Quincy that he cares about. Instead, as the son of the Soul King, the Quincy King is of great interest to him. With a smirk, Yhwach realises this bespectacled captain knows a lot more than he lets on, and decides he has time to play with this captain too. With a flash of intensity, Aizen grins as he wonders how the Soul King would feel about what his unruly son is doing to his precious Serete. As Yhwach muses that there is more to Aizen than meets the eye, Aizen lifts his already drawn Zanpakuto, seemingly preparing to make a move of his own. Although Yhwach doesn't know it yet, this is the moment Aizen places the Quincy King under his spell. Yhwach appears unfazed, but he suddenly makes the first move, readying a massive Quincy arrow similar to the one Roid flings at Yamamoto. Aizen merely stands there as Yhwach launches his arrow, a bolt of blue screaming towards the Shinigami. However, as a flash of light shimmers across Aizen's glasses, the captain merely swats the arrow aside with his bare hand, surprising Yhwach as it explodes in a ball of blue flame. Although Yhwach momentarily pauses, he's then quickly upon the captain, appearing through the rippling ball of blue fire, conjuring his sword from his Quincy cross mid-leap and locking blades with Aizen's sparks flying. Aizen muses from behind his sword, with a complacent grin on his face, that he didn't expect the Quincy King to draw his own sword so easily, and wonders what provoked him. However, Yhwach forces Aizen back with a hefty swing, telling him that he's no ordinary Shinigami, and any captain who can stop his arrows deserves his sword then instead. Aizen claims to feel honoured by Yhwach's praise, and admits that he's surprised to see the Quincy King so readily fighting on the front lines. Yhwach responds with only a smirk before raising an outstretched hand to Aizen and conjuring a massive Quincy bow in the sky behind him with the spell Sankt Borgen. Aizen's an interesting fighter in that despite his enormous strength, he tends to only make a move once someone else has already struck first. So, in the case of Hitsugaya, the captain was already preparing to launch an attack with his bankai when he was cut down. Then again later, Aizen lets the likes of Harabel and Komamura come at him first. After all, his entire strategy revolves around allowing his captains to let down their guard. Although Yhwach may be considerably more powerful than those characters, psychologically, when faced with Aizen, he seems to work in much the same way, and I don't see a reason why we shouldn't expect that to be the case. And so, Yhwach unleashes a volley of colossal arrows at the captain this time. As the Quincy King bombards the battlefield with an explosive display of glittering blue blasts, he finally lowers his hand, sneering to himself. Yhwach has been shown to be vindictive in the past, and while, as I said earlier, I think he'd relish the challenge from Aizen, I don't think he'd appreciate Aizen's many snarky comments. And so, with the air now full of dust and debris, Yhwach ponders whether even Aizen could deflect that many arrows this time. Suddenly, however, Aizen appears behind Yhwach, and at last it is Aizen's time to really make a move here. The captain swings at Yhwach with his blade, and it catches Yhwach on the shoulder as the Quincy King swerves, blood spurting into the air. Yhwach skids backwards and glances down at the wound. For this captain to be able to cut through even his blue vein is something else entirely, noting the raw physical strength of Aizen's sword swing. Aizen flicks the blood from his Zanpakuto, and notes that he meant to slice Yhwach's arm off with that slash, and miscalculated the reach. Yhwach smirks and straightens up to his full height. The Quincy King readily admits that he underestimated Aizen and expected him to be just as brittle as Kenpachi before him. Aizen laments that Yhwach underestimated him, before assuring him that he won't let that happen again, threatening to alter the Quincy King's perception of their battle entirely. With that, the two of them rush in and lock blades again, power pulsing across the ground as they break away and come crashing in again, the screech of metal ringing throughout the Serete. As the two warriors routinely clash blades, Aizen remarks on the modernity of the Vandenreich Quincy and wonders what lessons they learned from their extinction 200 years ago. Yhwach responds by noting that for all of Aizen's power, he still isn't a patch on the strength and lethality of the Shinigami who came before him, noting that for one thing, he's talking far too much, as the Quincy King brings his sword down with an almighty sweep. The ground shatters beneath Aizen's feet as the captain is pressured downwards, Yhwach drawing power from the environment around him to bolster his strength. Eventually, Yhwach is able to force Aizen's blade aside and slashes the captain with a huge vertical strike, Aizen's eyes widening in horror. Before Yhwach can ready another swing, however, he glances behind him and realizes Aizen has used Shunpo to escape. Gathering himself, Aizen smirks, explaining to Yhwach that he noticed something was off during their initial clash and needed to confirm it. Aizen explains that the scriptures were indeed correct. Yhwach can't absorb reishi like a normal Quincy, but instead appeared to be taking in pure power during their last clash. Yhwach indulges Aizen, telling him a little about the history of the Quincy, about how there were supposedly rare Quincy born once every 200 years, before declaring to Aizen that he can give and take power as much as he desires. Even Aizen's own power is his to do with as he pleases. Although smiling on the surface, Aizen doesn't particularly appreciate that truth, and so vanishes, reappearing behind Yhwach, noting that if that's the case, then he'll simply have to use this power to kill the Quincy King before it has the chance to be stolen. This time, however, Yhwach is ready for the attack, and turns around, grabbing Aizen's blade with his bare hand. Although blood bursts from between his fingers, Yhwach doesn't care. He simply needed to get in close, and yanks Aizen towards him, readying a second huge hit with his own sword. Pulling his arm back, Yhwach thrusts his blade through Aizen's chest, the captain's eyes bulging in horror. With Aizen crumpled upon Yhwach's sword, the Quincy King merely stares down at his opponent's body as blood runs from Aizen's mouth, his glasses slipping from his face. Thinking to himself, Yhwach wonders what Yamamoto will do now. However, as soon as Aizen's glasses hit the ground, one of the lenses cracks, and Yhwach hears a voice ring out, "Shatter, Kyoku Suigetsu." Yhwach is horrified to see Aizen's corpse explode into a million shards of glass before his eyes, as a sword bursts through the Quincy King's own chest. Behind him, Aizen reveals Kanzen Saimin, the power of his Zanpakuto. Again, whether or not Yhwach already knows of this ability is just something we're going to have to decide. Going into this fight, I mentioned that Yhwach is aware of it, but maybe he didn't expect it to be quite so all-encompassing, or convincing for that matter. Either way, it doesn't change the outcome. Yhwach glances down at the sword protruding from his chest, then back at Aizen, realizing Aizen placed him under his spell at the very start of their fight, as the real Aizen is completely unharmed. This could even work as a nice callback to the actual final battle of the manga. Regardless, Yhwach conjures another enormous bow to blast both himself and Aizen with an arrow, forcing Aizen to leap away in the midst of the explosion. However, this too seems to be what Aizen wanted. With a smirk, the captain lifts his hand as a dense swirl of black and purple energy cascades upon his palm. Yhwach can only look as he's suddenly surrounded on all sides by an enormous jet black box. Aizen's signature spell, Hado 90 Kuro Hitsugi, rises up from the ground, spewing a crackling energy in its wake. As Yhwach is swallowed up by the darkness, Aizen comments that he didn't expect his sword stab to finish the Quincy King off, merely he needed him distracted to be caught within his trap. However, the Quincy King counters by readying Blue Vein and Haben, the same defensive spell he uses to protect himself from Ichibe's own Kido. As Reishi shoots from Yhwach's veins, latching itself to the floor beneath his feet and generating a huge protective blue dome above the Quincy, the Kurohitsugi is completed and encases Yhwach, massive purple spokes driving into the coffin from all sides, impaling all within it. Remember, this is only Captain Aizen, and so this Kurohitsugi only manifests a third of its destructive power. As a result, when the spell comes to an end, and the coffin itself collapses, Aizen sees a blue light shining through the dust. Kurohitsugi was successful in breaking apart Blue Vein and Haben, but with access to only a third of its destructive potential, it wasn't able to touch the Quincy King himself, and Yhwach smirks at Aizen through the mess of Light and Reishi. I've noticed there's an awful lot of villainous smirking going on in this fight, which I think is quite fitting. Anyway, this is where I have to be upfront with you all. I'm not sure how to end this duel, because ultimately, to cut a long story short, I think Yhwach would probably win this encounter. In my opinion, as we've seen here, Yhwach struggles initially due to underestimating Captain Aizen. Aizen is faster, smarter, and stronger than he anticipated, leading to Aizen landing a pretty nasty slash on Yhwach's shoulder, and even tricking him with Kyoku Suigetsu, to the point where Aizen is able to stab the Quincy King through the back. When writing him, Aizen has to feel as though he is on a completely different level to basically every single captain barring Yamamoto, and I think we've achieved that here. But yeah, I think Yhwach would eventually win this thing, if for no other reason than the fact he possesses a crazy number of absolutely wild abilities even before getting the power of the Almighty. Take Sanct Altar, for example, an ability he hasn't even used yet in this fight, but one that he absolutely could. How would that work? The only time we see it used in the series is when the Sternra to Steel bankai, and as we see, that works absolutely fine. And later when Yhwach himself tries to use it on Ichibei to steal his power. Again, this idea of power is frustratingly nebulous, but I just assume Ichibei would have become weaker overall, maybe more tired, more sluggish, while Yhwach would have grown stronger. But it doesn't work, so we never really know. Would Ichibei have lost his ability to control the power of black entirely? As far as I can tell though, Aizen wouldn't have any recourse, and Yhwach would be able to use Sanct Altar against him, unless Aizen is powerful enough to somehow overcome it, but I kinda doubt it. Then there's Yhwach's own ability to give and take power freely. Again, in his fight with Ichibei, when Ichibei cuts Yhwach's power in half, we see the Quincy King is capable of, well, just restoring it completely. He doesn't seem to take that power from anywhere. It's not like Valen. He's just able to restore his lost power because he's Yhwach, and so again it kind of feels like there's very little Aizen could really do in the long haul. Even though Royd is utterly steamrolled, it is critical to realise that, well, Royd basically never uses a single one of Yhwach's innate abilities. Whereas in his fight with Ichibei, the real Yhwach goes kind of crazy. For example, if Aizen were to ever make physical contact with Yhwach, the Quincy King could quite literally infect him with his reishi and take over his body by sending reishi through his veins, just as he tried to do with Ichibei. And unlike Ichibei, I'm not sure Aizen quite has the immense heft to just force it back out through his veins again. This version of Aizen is incredibly strong. Like I said, he is cutting down captain-level fighters with a single swing of his sword, and Kyoku Suigetsu is of course a fight-winning ability on its own. But is it really enough against Yhwach himself? This is a man who tanks numerous hits from Ichibei, who is also one of the single most powerful characters in Bleach. It takes Ichibei robbing Yhwach of all of his power and reducing him down to an ant, before crushing him between two gigantic spectral hands to even think that he's killed him. And even then Yhwach survives. As I've pointed out here, I definitely think Aizen's skill and intelligence enable him to land multiple hits on Yhwach, and even do enough damage, to the point where Yhwach stands up and takes notice. But again, Yhwach, even as Roid, with only 80% of his power, took the brunt of Ryujinjaka on his arm as their fight began. Yhwach is the type of fighter to engage Aizen in the same kind of way as Yamamoto. Once Yhwach overcomes Hado 90, and he has a much better idea of how Kyokusuigetsu works, I wonder how he'd combat it. Would he simply allow Aizen to get in close and stab him like the head captain did? Maybe this time Aizen stabs Yhwach and the Quincy King mutters that he should have paid more attention the first time, as Kyokusuigetsu's Reiatsu is evident this time around, so therefore it must be the real deal. What about Sankt Altar? Could Yhwach use that to rob Aizen of his power and undo Kyokusuigetsu's illusions? Would it work like that? So if we were to continue the fight to its end point then, Yhwach emerges from Kurohitsugi as his Blut Vein Anhaben cracks and breaks around him, faltering under the Kido spell's pressure. From the swirling dust, Yhwach launches a second arrow at Aizen from afar, and it skewers the captain. But of course, it is just another illusion. The real Aizen appears beside Yhwach and swings at him, the two of them clashing blades again, only this time Aizen puts everything he had into the attack, and Yhwach's sword snaps in two. Unfazed, however, the Quincy King quickly conjures a Reishi broadsword and swipes up at Aizen, forcing him to jump backwards. Yhwach mentions being able to sense Aizen's power before he darts towards the captain, now eager to end things. Yhwach swings at Aizen with his Reishi sword and cuts the captain in two. But the real Aizen is once again behind him, and this time drives his sword into Yhwach's side, and Yhwach doesn't attempt to evade it. Instead, in a way that's reminiscent of Yamamoto during the Fake Karakura Town arc, he simply grabs Aizen's arm, noting that he can sense the Reiatsu flowing from Kyokusuigetsu itself. Then, with Aizen in his grip, Yhwach lifts his hand to the sky and activates Sankt Altar, robbing Aizen of his power and stripping away any illusions that Kyokusuigetsu has active. Again, I don't really know if his ability works like this, but when he tries to use it against Ichibei, like I said, he does seemingly actually take his power of black to bolster his own ability, something the anime tries to make even more explicit. So either way, Yhwach takes Aizen's power and delivers a massive strike, ending the fight. Do I think Aizen would die? Of course not, but he's enormously wounded and exhausted. In a huge blow to his pride, Aizen is forced to retreat, while Yhwach is capable of simply restoring what of his was lost throughout their battle. And so that's the end of the latest Bleach versus battle. With everything said and done, I do in fact think that Yhwach would emerge victorious, but it's a really close call in my opinion, and it's a hard one to decide. And it's always weird thinking that Aizen is going to lose a fight, but I mean, it has happened on occasion. The thing with Yhwach that just gives him the edge, in my opinion, is that even at this early stage of the character, he has access to so many different abilities, so many absurdly powerful abilities at that just gives him endless options at his disposal. There's just so very much that Yhwach can do, and as far as I'm concerned, that's why he wins. But I think it's very important that we don't underestimate Captain Aizen, and at the very least, we allow him to get a few hits in here and there to show that he really is on a different level, above every other Gotei 13 captain, but below Yamamoto, who I think would certainly with bankai fairly handily defeat Yhwach at this stage. Also, that's another thing. Aizen potentially has an entire bankai under his belt that he can use, but since we don't know what it is, we can't factor it in. Alright everyone, but that's it for today's video. As always, I really do hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you took something of value away from it as well. Remember to let me know down in the comments who you think would win this battle between Pre-Hōgyoku Captain Aizen and Pre-Almighty Yhwach. I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. Do you think I'm right, or do you think I'm way off base? Do please let me know, and let me know who you want to see for the next Bleach versus battle, and like I said, I'll shout out the winner in that video, so do please let me know down in the comments. Alright everyone, once again, thank you so very much for watching. Consider hitting subscribe down below if you haven't done already. Check out my other channel, Mr. Tomo Talks Games. A massive thank you goes out to all of my wonderful supporters over on Patreon, who I really do appreciate so very much. Your support does make all the difference in the world, and it does mean absolutely everything to me. Alright guys, until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.